The ACLU came out the other night in opposition to a bill that has gained an extraordinary number of co-sponsors in both the House and the Senate, which I wrote about with Glenn Greenwald yesterday at The Intercept, sparking a bit of controversy. So I want to talk about that story with you guys today, ask any questions that you want about it. We can talk about the fallout from it. It's called the Anti-Israel Boycott Act, or the Israel Anti-Boycott Act, something like that. Essentially what it does is it criminalizes supporting what's known as the BDS movement. This is people who are supporting boycotting, divesting from, or sanctioning Israel over its treatment of Palestinians in the occupied territories. And what it does is it takes a current law that makes it illegal to participate in an ongoing old Arab League boycott and expands it to what they call governmental institutions, governmental organizations, by which they specifically define as the United Nations and the European Union. Now, the European Union is the one that is more relevant here, but there are elements of the UN that may come into play too. In other words, if the European Union says that you can't trade in the occupied territories as a result of pressure from this movement, and you as an American participate in that international movement, then you're committing a felony. Now, the crime that is stipulated in the underlying statute is a maximum $1 million fine or 20 years in prison. The new statute specifies that that you would be fined in accordance with the statute. Now, the ACLU believes that once you reference the statute in the original bill, it doesn't matter if you specify a preference for a fine, that if a prosecutor asks for the prison sentence, the judge would legally be allowed to give that prison sentence. So there's some debate over whether or not that 20-year sentence applies. The ACLU believes it does. It's ambiguous enough that if the authors of the bill wanted to clear it up, they could do so easily. I spoke with a number of senators yesterday and asked them about the ACLU letter and whether or not the ACLU coming out and saying that this is a violation of the First Amendment, this criminalizes political speech, whether that changes the way that they think about it. And when we edit this piece and put it up on YouTube later, we'll include some of those exchanges that I had with senators. When I asked Senator Ben Cardin, he was insistent there are absolutely no criminal penalties associated with this, which isn't the case. And he was unfamiliar with the ACLU letter. He also told me that he was opposed to criminal penalties being associated with this. So I'm going to reach back out to his office and say, okay, now that it's been cleared up that there are in fact criminal penalties associated with it, even if you think it's only the $1 million fine, which is a rather big fine, that is still a felony, it's still a criminal penalty. You've said you don't want criminal penalties associated with that. Does this change your approach towards the bill? Now, he is the lead sponsor of this bill. However, we know from lobbying records and from online statements that AIPAC, the kind of the lobby for kind of the Israeli interests, is the one that pushed and wrote this legislation. They've been pushing very hard on members of the House and members of the Senate to sign on to this. They've been doing it quietly with a lot of from what I've been told, a lot of one-on-one meetings, a lot of group meetings with kind of AIPAC chapters in districts. There are a significant number of House and Senate Democrats who supported the Iran deal, suffered the wrath of AIPAC as a result, and in some ways were willing to do sort of a make-up call here. And the way they wrote the bill was clever in the sense that if you just read the bill itself, it doesn't say anything about the penalties. You have to go forward and say, oh, it amends Section 206 of this other bill. And now you have to flip through the criminal code, find Section 206 of the other, and then you see the criminal penalties. So my sense is that this is going to open up a significant rift with AIPAC and some members of Congress who are going to feel like they were tricked into looking bad. Because this morning, local papers, I saw one in Boston, I saw one in New York, were writing stories about their local member of Congress who had signed on to this bill. So while we wrote it from a national level, it's kind of like bait for local reporters, because now all they have to do is go and check to see if their member of Congress or their senator is sponsoring this. Call them up, and you've got yourself an easy story for the next day's paper. So my sense is that the public outrage that has come after our story is going to be is going to push back, and you're going to see people either start dropping off of the bill, or you're going to see it start to flatline. But anything is possible. So if there are any questions coming in about this, I'm also put them in the Facebook comments thread. I'm also happy to take any questions about the latest unfolding nonsense around the Affordable Care Act.
You want to comment on the CBO?
Yeah, so the CBO just came out. Stalin has a great quote where he says, if one person starves to death, it's a tragedy. If a million starve to death, it's a statistic. And so, in some ways, it's wrong to even get into these massive numbers because they could be wrong by several million. What is this one? So 32 million uninsured was the number on the full repeal. What did they come out with? 22, 25 on the latest thing. In some ways, it doesn't matter. These are millions of people that we're talking about losing their health insurance as a result of this law. And if you haven't yet read the transcript of President Trump's interview last night with the New York Times, it's just an extraordinary document. It's if you can divorce yourself from the terribleness of it, it's a kind of a pleasure to just go through and laugh at the way that this is all unfolding. But one of the points he made was actually a profound one for him, which was that once people have something, it is very hard to take it away. And that's almost a direct quote from him. And he was talking about the guarantee for pre-existing conditions. And as he was saying, people now across the political spectrum believe that if you have a pre-existing condition, that you should not be discriminated against in the insurance market, and that you should be entitled to insurance. Now, if you weren't old enough to follow the passage of the Affordable Care Act back in 2009 and 2010, let me just tell you what a striking change that is. Before 2009, if you had a pre-existing condition, let's say you had cancer as a child or later in your life, or anything, diabetes, whatever, anything else, you went to purchase insurance, you were charged an insane amount of money, and everyone, right to left, just accepted that as the way that the system worked. Now, people on the left were pushing for healthcare reform, some pushing for single payer, others pushing for this technocratic version of reform. So they wanted it improved, but that was the status quo. And across the board, Republicans agreed that that is how it should be. The insurers were taking on more risk by taking on somebody who had cancer as a child. Therefore, that person should have to pay more money for their insurance. Think about it. That is no longer the politics. Republicans do not say that anymore. And it shows you how even the smartest strategists don't really know what's going to happen in the future, because as somebody who covered passage of the bill in 2009 and 10, I can tell you that pre-existing conditions was talked about, but it was by no means the kind of centerpiece of the reform. Yet it has become kind of the centerpiece of the defense of reform. And you have people, even President Trump and a bunch of Republican senators saying, look, you have to protect people with pre-existing conditions. Jerry Moran, who's being called one of the conservatives, and saying that he opposed it from a conservative direction, I think that's actually false to say. In his statement, when he said he couldn't vote for the bill, he said we have to protect people with pre-existing conditions. That would have been a very progressive position just 10 years ago. Now it's the position of somebody like Jerry Moran, who's on the further right edge of the party. Now, this bill is still being written about as if it's somewhat alive, that it has some chance. Let's discard that metaphor for a moment, because it has some chance of getting through. But here's the problem with that argument. Rand Paul and Susan Collins are publicly opposed to anything remotely close to this. That leaves them with 50 senators who they could possibly get, which is the bare minimum that they need to pass it. Senator John McCain is in Arizona, recovering and fighting a brain tumor. He's not in the United States Senate. You can't vote by proxy. So without his vote, they're at 49. Maybe reporters are pretending that the bill still has a chance because they love Senator John McCain. He's a fun, friendly guy to be around. They don't want to talk about the kind of, they don't want to bring up the tragedy associated with the reason why they have fewer than 50 votes right now, but that's the reality of it.
Okay, Ryan, let's reset back to the headline here about the potential law to ban U.S. citizens advocating for a boycott of Israel over the Palestinian issue. So some comments from the audience. Kathleen Cooper says this is horrifying. Cody Reed says this is terrifying. Arn Barron says, could it be that people in Congress were supporting this without really knowing the full consequences?
Yeah.
And finally, can you reset because some people missed the beginning because of a technical problem?
Okay, so yes, I think that that point is an important one. I think that many members of Congress, and I talked to one aide, for instance, today, who said, no, we never knew anything about these criminal penalties. Now, you can say, hey, that's on you guys. You need to do a thorough amount of research before you put your name to a bill. That is an absolutely fair statement to make. It's also not totally connected to reality. Sometimes members of Congress sit down with a powerful interest group, they hear out the arguments, and they say, you know what, I'm in. And they don't say I'm in after I read all of the fine print. They say I'm in because there is a trust built up between these validators and these members of Congress, and they trust that the bill is what they say it is. Sometimes it's not, as in this case. But what the bill specifically does is it says if an American citizen supports or furthers a boycott that is affiliated with a governmental organization such as the United Nations or the European Union of Israel or other countries friendly to the United States. That part isn't getting mentioned much. It's in our story. But if you read the statute, it's not just Israel. There's one specific section that's about Israel. But there's another subsection that says if you boycott in this manner any countries that are friendly to the United States. Now, what is friendly? If we're bombing ISIS in Syria, is the Syrian government friendly to us? What if we're also bombing the Syrian government? What governments are friendly? Is there a list? So the law says if you support this, you are subject to up to $1 million fine, and according to the ACLU and their reading of the legislation, up to a 20-year prison sentence. This bill is an extension of a bill that's already on the books that says that if a business supported this old Arab League boycott of Israel, then they would be breaking the law. That bill has been upheld in court because it said these are specific countries that are trading with the United States and making as a condition of trading with the United States some type of participation in this boycott. And so as a result, this is a kind of business issue and not a First Amendment issue. The ACLU thinks, and this makes perfect sense to me, that it is unconstitutional to take that dubious standard and extend it to a non-governmental or to a governmental organization like the UN or the EU, because we don't trade in any sense with the UN. Like there's no, UN doesn't make anything, and so there's no business relationship there. The only thing that's happening here is criminalizing politics. The way you can tell how unconstitutional this is that it is perfectly legal to not do business with Israel. I don't particularly do any business with Israel. I don't have an export-import company. Most people I know don't do business with Israel. There's nothing illegal about that. If a person under this law said, I'm not doing business with Israel because I am supporting the BDS movement, then all of a sudden it becomes a crime. So in other words, the precise same activity is only a crime based on the motivation, the political motivation behind it. If it's politically motivated, then it's a crime. If it's not politically motivated, it's a business decision, then it's not a crime. And so you are literally criminalizing political thought. And so you could even find a case where somebody never said publicly that they were participating in the BDS movement. But in the past, they had made statements on their Facebook page advocating for the rights of Palestinians. And then then their business stopped doing business with Israel or with a company that had a plant in the occupied territories or whatever. And a prosecutor could say, well, here is our circumstantial evidence that the reason that you made this decision was not business related, but politically driven by. And note, too, that there are a non-trivial number of Palestinian Americans who were driven here as a result of the wars of 48, 67, and the ongoing occupation. And so you would be telling Palestinian Americans that they are not allowed to protest the very activity that led to them becoming refugees and being here in the United States. It's just, I'm not a lawyer, but it seems on its face unconstitutional, and that seems to be the judgment of everybody else who's looked at it other than clearly these lawmakers.
Sean Rock wants to know what the bill is called so that he can contact his member of Congress.
So it's S720 is the number on the Senate side. It's either, I'll look it up right now, it's either or I guess Eric can, it's either the Israel Anti-Boycott Act.
Does it say in here? Can I control mine?
Yeah, I think it's the Israel Anti-Boycott Act, but it's S720. And if you find S720...
Yeah, I say Israel Anti-Boycott Act.
So Israel Anti-Boycott Act, I'm always flipping the words around. So that's the law. You can find it at thomas.gov or at GovTrack. There's a link to it. If you go to theintercept.com, you can find our story. And in our story, we link to the Democratic and Republican co-sponsors in both the House and the Senate to find out who is your member. I might know offhand. What was the guy who asked the question?
Oh, I don't. Okay.
Oh.
He's going to have to put it in the comments.
All right, put in the comments who your senators are and who your House member are, and I might know offhand if they're sponsors. Yeah, but there's hundreds of them, so I might also not know offhand.
Okay, so you got two choices. There's two themes here. There's because you did talk about the CBO score and Trump care going down in flames, talking about Bernie care or Medicare for all or Medicaid for all. I know you addressed that 2 days ago, but you could do that again. And then there's 3 or 4 people who are saying, how can you talk about this when the Democratic primary there was cheating? Why talk about anything else? And that's including Frank Wiggins, who has asked this question often. Of us.
Frank?
Yeah.
Frank, I don't know. I mean, well, so I'll give you my answer. I'm in the news. This is the new thing. This is what's happening. If I went to work every day and just filed one more story on what happened during the Democratic primary, I wouldn't last long in my job. People want to know what's happening. What if I knew about this bill and I decided not to write anything about it because I was told that I had to just focus on either this lawsuit or the primary or what the DNC did and whether Donna Brazile is still getting paid by the DNC, and then the law passed. Now it's a law of the land. Now people are getting rounded up who are part of the BDS movement. I'm like, it's a shame. I actually knew that was happening, and I was going to say something about it, and maybe people could have activated around it and stopped it from happening. But I had a really interesting piece on Donna Brazile that I was going to write. I don't think people who were in chains going to prison after this bill became law would find that to be a reasonable decision on my part. Journalistically, I have only so much time in the day, and so I have to decide where to.
Okay, well, Frank would probably counter that the story about whether Donald Trump Jr. or Donald Trump or Paul Manafort colluded with Russia to use weaponized intelligence to affect the outcome of the election, that's about last year also, but there's umpteen million stories about that, and nobody talks about whether or not the DNC and Hillary were colluding.
That's a fair point. However, I would ask Frank, how many stories about Don Jr. do you think you'd be reading right now if Donald Trump had lost the election? Hillary lost, and so she won the primary, and so the people that she beat in the primary are still remember that. But she lost the general election, and so a lot of the country has just moved on from her, forgotten about her. And if you saw her approval rating, is in the 30s. She was like 2 points below Donald Trump. She hadn't even done anything. Like, Donald Trump earned his 30-something. Hers just gravity, which is unusual because normally in the past, when she was in the public light, her approval rating would go down, and then when she was out of the public spotlight, her approval rating would go up. People were like, oh yeah, she was great, and then she'd come back and it would go back down. This is the first time that where she's gone away, and it's actually gone even further down. But so I think if Trump had lost, you wouldn't be hearing squat. A few people would be writing about Russia on the cybersecurity side, the kind of the people whose beat it is to write about that. But national reporters would be writing about Benghazi, because they'd be writing about emails, and they'd be writing about whatever else the Select Committee on impeaching Hillary Clinton was writing about. So that's a fair point.
Okay, so on healthcare, Bernie's going to introduce, I saw him on PBS last night, he's going to introduce Medicare for All. Is it Medicare or Medicaid?
Yeah, he's Medicare. And so he had said that as a kind of, as a strategy to, resist the repeal of Obamacare, he was going to wait until they beat back that effort. And then he would, now that they're in retreat, or they're headed towards retreat, whenever they finally come to terms with the fact that it's over, then he's going to release his Medicare for All bill. And so, true to his word, he's now coming out with his bill, which will make for a very interesting debate. Because there's kind of a trans-party interest in this issue.
Nora or Stacy, do you have any good comments or questions that you picked up? So Nora and Stacey are looking at comments. Did you want to say one more thing?
No, there was a third thing. There was Frank.
Well, they just want to know about, if Trump care is going down in flames, does it give us a better chance? Or is it just something that we're going to be... I liked how you called it a press release. It was basically a press release every time they voted to repeal Obamacare when Obama was still president. Is it just a press release for Bernie to introduce it? Or is there any chance?
Well... And not to disparage press releases either. A press release can be an organizing tool. So for Republicans, it was to repeal Obamacare all of these 70 times or whatever. It was an organizing tool. They were organizing their base. Now, they were not organizing them toward the thing that the base thought they were being organized toward, but rather just organized towards taking power and then flopping on their faces.
Electioneering.
Right. Organizing towards winning elections. Bernie's will be... at this point, a symbolic gesture, but it is an organizing tool. It is something to rally around. John Conyers has known for decades that H.R. 676 wasn't going to become law. It's not written to become law. It's like a one-page bill. If you read it, there's no way. Even if everybody passed it and Trump signed it into law, you wouldn't have single payer. It's not. It just kind of sets you on the path toward Medicare for all. But by having it to organize around, he's moving towards a goal, and so that's what Sanders is doing here. Is he's sparking a conversation, but until he controls or single-payer supporters control the levers of power, it's just that. Stacey, you said you had one?
Yeah, so there are a few comments about this, and so I kind of want to create a question out of this. Okay. So back to the thing about Israel, is there a relationship between the money and politics theme that we're seeing here and oil, and kind of the relationship between Israel, the U.S., and oil in the Middle East?
Right. So I guess the question is kind of like, is Israel's geopolitical value to the United States has always been as kind of like a U.S. satellite state, right there in the Middle East to help the U.S. project power in the Middle East. And the reason that the U.S. would be interested in projecting power in the Middle East is not the sand, but it's what's under the sand. And so, yeah, absolutely, that is at the root of the geopolitics, and it's not. The relationship that the U.S. has with Israel, it has almost as tight a relationship with Saudi Arabia, which diametrically opposed in almost every way, except for that particular interests that they have right there. It was never obvious that it was necessarily going to go this way. Israel was founded, fairly independently. It had a burgeoning anarchist and socialist movement, and a lot of the Arab countries were strongly anti-communist, and that's how they wound up allied with the United States. And so when they went to war, that created all sorts of geopolitical problems as well, particularly for the U.S. as its allies are fighting each other. But yeah, I think that's a fine way of putting it, that the geopolitics are heavily at play here. So if you move away from fossil fuels and are instead relying on wind, solar, and other renewables,
peace in the Middle East.
Well, certainly you wouldn't have it as a place for a proxy war between global powers. Certainly that resources spark conflict because people are fighting over those resources. If the resources go away, you still have human nature. You still have people jockeying for power, but you don't have the same motive.
Yeah, and in response to that, Jason Evans is saying. As a response to that, Jason Evans is saying that in the world's largest Jewish population is in the U.S., and with World War II, it is political suicide to side against Israel. So you also have some of the richest people in the country identifying as Jewish, and the richest lobbyists on Wall Street identifying as Jewish and from Israel.
For sure. It's very, very, very much associated with the Democratic Party. The civil rights movement, social justice, and only in the last 10 years or so has Israel taken this dramatically right-wing turn, which is now causing it a lot of problems with the diaspora here in the United States.
Okay, one last thing. So there was an interesting comment, just basically saying that Jews and Muslims and Christians used to all get along, and then came Israel. Can you speak to the goal of the boycott, and then wrap up by connecting back to this law that's targeting people who support that goal?
It's true that it's not true that there has been harmony. It is. There is a kind of right-wing pernicious lie out there that Islam has been at war with itself for 700 years. So why should the U.S. or 1,300 years or whatever? Why should the U.S. or anybody think that war is going to stop? And that's actually not true. There are periods that have gone on for centuries where the Muslim world has been largely at peace, and where different religions lived in the Middle East peaceably together. Now, it's also the case that you've constantly had struggles for power, but that doesn't really say anything about religion. If you look at the history of Ireland over 2,000 years, far before there was a Catholic-Protestant split, there's constant war going on between the different clans. It didn't have anything to do with which gods they were worshiping. It was just this was how power was transferred. From when one leader died, the people under him fought for it. If a leader weakened, the clan that was next door would go to war against them. So, it's only recently that there's been kind of this implementation of this thing that we call a peaceful transfer of power, which has reduced war in a lot of different ways. What was exactly the question that we're trying to get to? The goal of the boycott is to crush the BDS movement. This is a movement that is growing in power, not necessarily here in the United States, though it is picking up supporters here and there, but it's becoming much more popular, particularly in Europe, to say that look, as long as you are living as long as you're perpetuating kind of an apartheid-like state in the occupied territories, then we are going to sanction companies. We're going to sanction companies that are doing business with you. That's the movement. It is the biggest threat to the occupation, probably in the 50-year history of it, and so this is a response to it, to say that no, you cannot participate in this.
Quickly, got
So-
one more from Stacey.
Well, not to do with Israel, but I kind of want to talk about healthcare for a second. So I was reading online this morning, Donald Trump said that 21-year-olds pay $12 a month on average in the United States for their healthcare. Not a month, sorry, a year. So can you kind of comment on that and what the actual number is, or around the actual number, and what the real statistics are?
I think Trump was thinking of life insurance. I don't think Trump necessarily knows what he's talking about when it comes to that. A lot of you would know better what it costs to get insurance. If you're under 26, you can get it right on your parents' plan, if your parents have a plan. Depending on everything else depends on your income. If you have no income, you're going to you can get on Medicaid, which is effectively free. If you have too much money to get onto Medicaid, then you can get subsidized through the exchanges. But you're going to pay more than you might have before Obamacare, because you're kind of subsidizing the people that we talked about earlier who have pre-existing conditions.
Yeah.
So,
Okay,
Cool.
I'm going to shout this one out. We'll end on this. You can respond or
All
you
right.
can sign out. Charles Patrick says, I support the boycott, so arrest me, motherfuckers.
you're still allowed to, as long as it's not the Arab League boycott and you don't do business, I guess, with Egypt. But the law, the bill has not become a law yet, so enjoy your boycotting, your freedom to boycott for now. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for watching.